So yeah, so I've been doing this lecture series since 2017. We've had at Aalto from 2013, so this is the like a celebratory year of the open lecture series. So my name is Annakaisa Kultima, and I've been a game researcher since 2005. And a lot of the studies that I've done in game research throughout my career has been about the changes in the industry. For the past years, I've been more and more interested in a sort of like a future studies aspect of understanding these changes. And so I've devised, devised a survey that this talk is kind of opening the survey of the trends. But before I've done the kind of the survey, that was also last spring and also this year, what I have been typically done is that I go to conferences and talk to the professionals. With the curation of the Games Now lecture series, I've had even formal interviews with my network contacts to realize kind of what are the things that people are talking about, what are the important things that we should cover. And then also what I've done is to kind of have this browsing of different journalistic pieces of the top trends of the game industry. In the last year's lecture of our Games and Now Future Barometer, I was also talking about what is lacking in those perspectives from the industry, like journalistic points of view. And it doesn't cover everything that happens in games. It covers the certain kind of core businesses that are in the radar of the game journalists. But here are some of the words that I have found in the articles around, like it's typical that people release these articles around January or February. So these have been the kind of trends that are mentioned. So something like cloud-based gaming, VR and AR is oftentimes listed. There's still metaverse listed there. Interestingly, wearable technology, maybe kind of following some of the VR ponderings, hyper-casual, hybrid casual, dominance of mobile games in general, then a lot of like monetization things, and you know, the kind of list goes on, but there's very little change compared to last year's kind of forecasts from the journalistic pieces. So this is also visible in the survey study that we did this spring. And to kind of open up what is the basis, like who has been answering to our survey, is that it's actually a really nice collection of age groups. So there's all different ages is presented there, around 100 responses. Maybe like over half of the respondents have quite good game industry experience. I've been really happy to see that there's even like 1/4 of the responses have been around 15 years of experience in the industry. So there's a lot of insight there. And then typically the kind of the biggest groups of roles answering into the surveys, game designers or other production roles. And then I do have also game scholars and educators, about another 1/4 in the responses. And since we are in Finland, the majority or the kind of the biggest group, not majority, but biggest group of the respondents are Finnish people. So a bit more this year than last year, but there isn't like that kind of a big change in the base of the answers. Let's look a little bit closer to this year's responses. So game designer as a 24% of the respondents, and then there is the 10 and 11 percentages is the game educator and the game researchers. So, and then some other roles too, but more than a half is in the production roles. And as I said, quite big percentage of the more than 15 years of experience in the field, but then also some equal amount of respondents that have never worked in the game industry. But it doesn't mean that they are not professionals. But yeah, it's not a really long lecture that I can give you about these topics. And this survey was closed last night, so don't expect like a cross-checking of the kind of a background information or something like that. But there's a very interesting thing between the 22 and 23, which is like really immediately apparent when looking at the results. So last year when we did the survey, like overwhelmingly, things like NFT, crypto games, blockchain, metaverse that was related to Web3 technologies, Web3 in general, it was in the major and minor trends that people were reporting, it was very visible there. And then a little bit of AI, which is now even more overwhelmingly dominating this year's results. So my kind of sense here is that also on the other trends that were reported were a bit kind of less specific. There was less of those reported this year because AI tools, especially the creative AI, has been taken by a storm of this field. So that's definitely visible here, and it's kind of interesting to compare it in terms of how many mentions there were in the survey. So not many were seeing the AI coming in last year, but then now it is a majority of the responses, and then the NFT has kind of declined into similar amount that that AI was last year. But there are other trends also mentioned. So these are just completely overwhelmingly dominating. We've had a lot of coverage of the topic also this year. But there is interesting kind of groups of trends mentioned this year. This hasn't been counted how many times, but sort of like interesting list of things. So there's a trends of society and policy. So there's a lot of discussion, for instance, about accessibility, climate change, green games, workplace, environment, work conditions, regulation, and also, for instance, hybrid work. And then the impact of recession and the wartime. So the kind of the things that maybe happens also outside games a lot. And then there is a mention of types of games, like the content of the people are working at. Cozy game was mentioned a lot compared to other things, but then there is others mentioned like MMOs, FPSs, fitness games, skill games, social games, even porn games, to the topic of AI. Hyper-casual, social media, Souls-like, definitely one of the trends, and some nostalgic topics as well. But that's one of the areas that the mentions are covering. Then there is actually, interestingly, also discussion about monetization, and this has to do with also other topics such as regulation. So monetization models, for instance, hybrid monetization, creator economies have been mentioned many times, early access model, microtransactions in a new way, pivot from games as services, subscription-based games, the kind of the movement in the front of game stores was mentioned, and things that has to do with subscriptions such as season passes. And then there's the trend that we covered this year as well here, is the eased game development, so low code, no code, different platforms where the users create games, visual programming, user-generated content in general, and then, for instance, specific mentions such as Unreal Editor for Fortnite. And of course, the technology, which is the way that we think about trends in games often, is that they're technology related, so cross-platform, one of the things, a big trend also last year, VR, AR, XR, and then cloud-based gaming. Yeah, so there is a lot of other trends also mentioned, but definitely the dominance of AI tools and the kind of variations of that, discussion about how they will improve some of the workflows. Actually, I think that it's already so much more mature discussion in this survey than what we had as a discussion in the early of this season in last year. Yeah, and then in kind of general, you can see that dominance also in the, so these are the graphs of people picking what are from the kind of preset set of trends and what are the trends that will impact you on next year. So you can see that there isn't that much of change other than the AI-generated art and then the NFT and blockchain. But there's also kind of reducing of the picking of the other trends, I guess, which is interesting in itself. So still on the top, there is, for instance, the discussion of diversity, hybrid work, sustainability, cross-platform, creator economies, metaverse, and then Discord also, which is interesting. So it really tells, and you can see that happening in the field, that you can see these trends working there. I didn't just ask in the survey what are the trends that you follow, but also like how do you actually know, what are the ways to know about the changes in the industry? And that hasn't changed that much either. So still kind of the main means, which is interesting in itself, is either reading the news or talking to other professionals. And then kind of runner-ups is that people attend conferences or that they, for instance, read research papers, definitely probably the game educators and researchers list. But then there's following the social media, such as Twitter, which is a bit less visible on this year's results, and other platforms such as LinkedIn or Facebook and Discord communities. So that's very kind of what I was expecting for. This year I also asked how important it is for you to follow the trends in the industry. So around 40% of the respondents find it extremely important for their work. But then there are some people that responded that it wasn't important at all. So it doesn't really cover all the roles in the industry. And then if asked, this is somewhat kind of curious to ask that who is the one that should follow the trends in the industry. So I would anticipate, for instance, creative director being one of the roles that people pick. But then there is definitely game designer also there. So game designer has to work with new things that the industry is kind of living through. And then of course CEO. Then there's the game researcher, that also makes sense. But then one thing that I don't really so much understand is well, monetization designer I can kind of understand, but then community manager is also listed there, game educator. So that's interesting. I don't know, maybe you have thoughts for that, why community managers need to be updated with the trends. So, kind of a little bit of disappointing and not that much new was popping up from the survey, but oftentimes it's not the things that shout, but it's the things that are maybe mentioned a couple of times. If we think about that difference between AI-generated art mentioned and then it becoming like very dominant on the next year. So it's like 6 people mentioned AI tools, and then this year 77. So there are sometimes that kind of even one couple of mentions might be the next things on the next year. But we already covered quite a lot of these topics. We've had the low-code, no-code tools such as Bitsy as one of our guest speakers covering, as well as Hype. Hype was giving a talk here. Then there is AI-driven talks that we've been talking about, things that happen in the field of art games. And then the applied games is one of the topics that is rising, and we've covered that too. So we covered that, and then today we cover a little bit more. For instance, regulation wasn't discussed in any of the talks yet, but today we will go there. And then we again cover AI today as it is so dominant, But then interestingly, other such as cozy games are now today covered. Yeah. We've had also podcasts where these trends are visible. So we started with an AI topic, but that was from years back. In 2018, we had Julian Togelius talking about AI in games. And then we went back to that topic in our podcast, looking back episodes. We've been covering idle games and their kind of what has happened. And together with that, also merge games genre. And then we've done a little bit of reflection of what has happened in many years from 2014 to today in VR games, then in culturalization, and then 2 episodes are quite recent, but they were already recorded last year. So we are looking at chat games together with Web3 games, and then also licensed games, so IP-driven game development. So I have put together, based on the things that are in the survey, the discussions that I've had with other professionals, and other sources that I've kind of tried to digest in my personal list of the trends for 2024. And I will try to cover a little bit, explain what I mean with this. I still have plenty of time with this. So I put it as a first, user-generated content. It's been there for such a long time, but what I pick from this year's survey results, last year's survey results, and different discussions is that there are plenty of companies that are trying to now kind of come back to that area, either in the form of making a platform for people to create games, or in other ways of utilizing the players' creativity in their products. And it is tied to a bit more new trend of creator economies. So that's a little bit something that has been also kind of growing on the background slowly of asset stores. We can see that very strongly, for instance, in our game jams. During a single jam that can be also very short, you are already able to do very polished work. And that's oftentimes to do with the fact that you can, for instance, get 3D models very easily and fast from the asset stores. Asset store kind of trend has been interesting because it's not just, for instance, visual assets, but it can be template games that you can buy, or different tools or pieces of code. So there's lots of things that is there available for you to kind of cut and paste. And there is an economy that is now built on top of that. So I've seen that also in my personal networks, that some previously, for instance, indie game developers might be now advertising their own asset packages. So when there is a possibility to pivot your business from making full games, you can make partial things for other people to use in their games, not in an outsourced way or with contracts, but with the help of a storefront. So that's definitely a thing that will be more and more visible in the discussions and in the workflows of people for the 2024 and onwards this year, of course. So that's an interesting thing to look at, and it is related to AI discussion. So we've been discussing about the creative AI tools. Hopefully Christian will help me to get the terms right. But it's definitely for the 24 already this year, there's a tools boom. You can see a lot of people now working on different kind of tools for people to use in their creative workflows. And there is an eagerness to test out these processes. And of course, that is tied to the discussion of regulation. So I hope at least that 2024, we get a bit more maturity for discussing how the whole situation should be regulated or not. So there is an ethical kind of questions there, social questions there. How should we utilize, for instance, tools that take jobs from some people. But I'm also suspecting that this is not going to be only about art things or visual things. It's going to be a trend that obviously games have a lot of other AI stuff and it's been there. So, but I think that a lot of people are utilizing the boom of that discussion to sell their other services. So there's going to be like varied topics in AI for the next year. What I've also seen is that there's an interesting kind of trend for the past years. So when I started as a game scholar, licensed games were crappy. But nowadays, it seems like that there's so much more very excellent quality, very well-standing games that utilize other brands. So for instance, Harry Potter or Pokemon, etc. So the big companies are working with big IPs, or experienced companies are working with licenses. There's two normalization trends that hybrid work will see a little bit of normalization. That it's going to be interesting to see what it does, for instance, to small companies that are now able to hire internationally. But there's also a normalization of accessibility, diversity, cultural awareness, and transparency of company or brand values is going to be on the wall. And I've seen this a little bit related, that big game companies would work with charity organizations that traditionally maybe universities or smaller kind of actors have been doing, for instance, applied games. TikTok, tied to regulation again, how it's going to go. But there is a struggle of social media platforms. It's been part of our ecosystem for a long time, but there's a decline in some of the major platforms, and people are escaping some of the social media networks. So that's going to impact the way that we make games or advertise or talk or run communities. But then there's an interesting thing of kind of this kind of varied things, kind of alternative ways of making in the business of games or in the games culture. There's going to be niche audiences, niche devices, niche platforms, like games for a certain thing, games for museum experiences, games for festivals. So the games are kind of not the same everywhere, but you might bump into some playful experiences also in the form of physical like spaces, such as sort of variants of escape rooms. Related to the regulation that we're gonna hear how it has been from Leena today, is that there is a kind of necessity to innovate with business models as well as how metrics are used in the game development. So we're gonna see more of the kind of testing of different approaches next year as well. The consolidation, I guess, maybe slowing down, but still continuing, and the games will continue to grow and dominate in the cultural field. However, there are already like smaller trends of foreseeing what's going to happen a bit further in the future. There's a decline in players on the other generations than millennials. And then at the kind of the last one, which is a big trend in itself, but it's harder to follow as part of the game industry or game professionals, is that games will be everywhere and done by others than what we, like the people that we accept as part of our network. So they will be done by whoever. It's so much more accessible in terms of tools and knowledge as well. But it's interesting, another direction is that, for instance, Unreal or Unity engines are used for non-game productions, and there's going to be more of businesses like that people take their game industry expertise outside of our field. So yeah, but who knows if this will hit the home or not, because, last year I was asking in the survey, how long to future are you planning your work? And it's remarkably big part of the people that in this field are not able to actually even plan more than 6 months from here. So maybe we don't, with my list of 2024, we don't even reach until the end of the 23 and something else will change again. So we are very short-sighted in this area. Some people have the luxury of thinking very far, but it's not always so easy. So basically what we've been saying this year and all the years is that in a little bit of cliche way that everything will change again. Nothing else is constant as much as the change in this industry. So yeah, that's it.